Diddy is now at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, a place that's been described as hell on earth.
In September 2024, federal agents arrested Sean Diddy Combs at Miami International Airport, while authorities alleged he was attempting to leave the country. Within hours, he was transported to Metropolitan Detention Center Brooklyn, a federal facility a judge previously described as operating under dangerous and barbaric conditions, unfit for pretrial detention. 15 months later, leaked footage exposed daily life inside the jail, revealing circumstances far worse than publicly acknowledged. Located in Brooklyn's Sunset Park neighborhood, MDC Brooklyn opened in the early 1990s with a design capacity of roughly 1,000 inmates.
Federal judges have called this building behind us barbaric. We save that term for conditions that are beyond the pale.
Today, it houses approximately 1,360 detainees. In September 2024, the Federal Bureau of Prisons quietly stopped sending sentenced defendants to the facility altogether, an extraordinary move that underscored systemic failure.
MDC is so bad, federal judges have questioned the harsh conditions for those here awaiting trial. So bad I was here 2 years ago during a cold spell, reporting on detainees with no heat, pounding on windows for help.
Federal judges have repeatedly used the term barbaric to describe conditions inside, language typically reserved for environments far outside constitutional norms. MDC Brooklyn has housed some of the most notorious figures in modern federal cases, including R. Kelly, Ghislaine Maxwell, Sam Bankman-Fried, Martin Shkreli, and Jeffrey Epstein prior to his Manhattan transfer.
The inmates that you're surrounded around, just in general, a lot of them are brought up on pretty heavy federal indictments, right? So just in terms of the atmosphere there, it's just certainly one that no one wants to be in.
Others include Fetty Wap, Tekashi 669 Ine, and Mexican cartel leader Ismael El Mayo Zambada Garcia. In January 2026, captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro joined the same roster, reinforcing the facility's reputation as a holding ground for high-profile detainees. Diddy's defense attorney, Mark Garagos, delivered a blunt assessment of the environment, describing conditions that posed serious risks to health, safety, and due process. Reports describe chronic power outages, scarce medical staff, delayed meals, freezing cells, broken plumbing, and violent lockdowns that stretch for days.
Occupy the street until they get heat!
In the winter of 2019, protests over a power outage left inmates without light or heat for a week in the cold.
I understand how cold it must be in those cells and not to have any electricity.
Attorneys cite mold, rodents, malfunctioning heating, and repeated failures to provide timely medication. Court filings document suicides, assaults, and emergency evacuations during blackouts. Advocacy groups argue prolonged pretrial confinement here pressures defendants into plea deals, while judges warn constitutional violations persist despite years of federal oversight and accountability reforms. Conditions inside Metropolitan Detention Center Brooklyn have become so severe that federal judges openly question whether pretrial detention there violates basic standards of humane treatment. During a past winter cold spell, detainees were reported pounding on windows, pleading for help as heating systems failed. Those scenes were not isolated incidents, but part of a broader pattern that continues to define daily life inside the facility. Inmates sleep on steel bunks fitted with thin, 1.5-inch mattresses and no pillows. Cells often measure roughly 8 by 10 feet, leaving little room to move. Sanitation is inconsistent, lighting is unreliable, and ventilation problems worsen already harsh conditions.
And in the last 3 years alone, 4 inmates have died by suicide. And violence is not the only issue. Accusations of medical neglect, staffing shortages, smuggling of drugs, some allegedly facilitated by employees.
Former federal inmate Michael Cohen, who served time in federal custody, described similar environments in blunt terms, calling them filthy, degrading, and mentally exhausting for anyone forced to endure them. Upon arrival in September 2024, Diddy was placed in the Special Housing Unit, commonly known as SHU. This unit is typically used for high-profile detainees under the justification of safety. In practice, it means near total isolation. Individuals held there can spend up to 23 hours a day locked inside a cell, with only 1 hour allotted for recreation. Contact with other inmates is minimal, and social interaction is severely restricted. Movement outside the cell triggers strict escort protocols. Guards surround detainees who are handcuffed and shackled while being transported through the facility. Every transfer follows maximum security procedures.
In April, a group of detainees that prosecutors said were MS-13 gang members in court documents stabbed an inmate 44 times in an attack caught on camera. 2 shivs were recovered from the attack.
Even basic privileges, such as access to legal phone calls, are tightly controlled, complicating communication with defense attorneys and slowing case preparation. The facility's most infamous breakdown occurred in January 2019, when a week-long electrical failure left inmates without heat or consistent lighting during a polar vortex. Outside temperatures dropped to 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside, detainees banged on windows and doors, desperate for relief. The images and reports shocked the country, but years later, critics argue that meaningful reform has still not followed. Public outrage boiled over during the winter of 2019, when power outages left inmates without heat or electricity for nearly a week. Demonstrations erupted outside the facility as reports confirmed detainees were trapped in freezing cells with no light, no warmth, and no timeline for relief.
In terms of fighting their case, it just makes it all the more difficult, because now in terms of you being able to communicate with your attorney, you are at the realms of just what's going on with respect to the facility.
This is dangerous, it's lawless, and it's unacceptable.
Representative Dan Goldman not holding back as he stands in front of the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, criticizing the conditions for around 100 newly placed ICE detainees inside.
The fallout was historic. A class action lawsuit filed on behalf of roughly 1,600 inmates resulted in a $10 million settlement, forcing accountability for conditions widely described as inhumane. Court filings detailed a grim reality inside Metropolitan Detention Center Brooklyn. Inmates were confined to their cells for days at a time. Toilets failed and overflowed, natural sunlight was non-existent, fresh air was unavailable. According to the court record, these conditions crossed the line from neglect into outright violations of basic human rights. A 2016 report from the National Association of Women Judges labeled the conditions unconscionable, citing violations of American Bar Association standards and the United Nations minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners. The report identified long-standing failures that were never meaningfully corrected, including lack of outdoor access, no exposure to sunlight, and inadequate ventilation throughout the facility. Chronic understaffing continues to worsen every problem. Too few correctional officers and severe medical staff shortages have pushed the jail into constant lockdowns, sometimes lasting 24 hours or more. When staffing collapses, so does security, medical care, and basic oversight. In the past 3 years alone, multiple inmate deaths have been reported, underscoring how fragile the system has become. Medical neglect remains one of the most serious allegations. Reports include delayed or botched diagnoses, untreated chronic illnesses, and limited access to doctors during extended lockdowns. Food safety complaints are equally alarming, with inmates describing spoiled or contaminated meals served repeatedly. Mold, fungus, rodent infestations, and sewage backups have all been documented by detainees in legal filings.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, he's got 4 years and change that he's going to ultimately have to serve, although he has served already a year as he awaited his trial and then went through his trial. So ultimately, probably he was going to serve about 2.5 years.
Oversight agencies continue to receive complaints, but meaningful reform has yet to materialize. Each investigation adds to the record, yet conditions persist.
He said, I was sleeping in my bed in the prison. It's a federal detention facility in Brooklyn called MDC Brooklyn. And there are federal inmates who are in many cases waiting for their trial as well.
Inside MDC Brooklyn, violence, neglect, and systemic failure have become routine rather than exceptional. In June 2024, violence inside Metropolitan Detention Center Brooklyn escalated to another deadly level. Uriel White, who was awaiting trial on gun-related charges, was stabbed to death by another inmate. The Federal Bureau of Prisons later confirmed the killing.
And Diddy claimed that somebody held a knife to his throat. He woke up and this guy basically had him and he had the knife, and Diddy was at this person's mercy.
Just 1 month later, in July 2024, another detainee, Edwin Corderero, died following a violent altercation that erupted inside the facility. Earlier that same year, court documents revealed an even more disturbing incident. Prosecutors stated that a group of detainees identified as alleged MS-13 gang members stabbed another inmate 44 times in a coordinated attack. The assault was captured on surveillance footage, and multiple improvised weapons were recovered afterward. Cordero's attorney later told the New York Times that his client was yet another casualty of an overcrowded, understaffed, and severely neglected federal jail. The phrase hell on earth continues to surface in descriptions of MDC Brooklyn.
Combs isn't the only famous inmate to be housed there. We had Sam Bankman-Fried there, R. Kelly, Ghislaine Maxwell. They were all inmates there. Sean Combs is being kept away from the general inmate population. You say his fame makes him a target.
Federal judges, defense attorneys, and former detainees have all used the same language independently, underscoring how normalized these conditions have become. In response to the wave of violence during the summer of 2024, 9 inmates were eventually charged in connection with multiple assaults and killings. While these charges signaled enforcement action, they also exposed a deeper issue. Weapons move freely inside the facility, security protocols routinely fail, and violence has spiraled beyond control. Legal filings also point to another crisis unfolding quietly inside the jail. Over the past 3 years, multiple inmate deaths have been linked to mental health breakdowns and suicides. Attorneys argue these deaths reflect a system incapable of providing even basic psychological care. Communication between detainees and their legal teams has become increasingly restricted, further complicating active defense cases. In January 2024, Jesse Furman issued a sharply worded statement acknowledging that conditions inside MDC Brooklyn had deteriorated so severely that reduced sentences based on confinement conditions had become routine. Prosecutors no longer objected, effectively conceding the facility's failures. Attempts at outside oversight have also been blocked. When Dan Goldman sought to tour the jail, he was denied entry, prompting a troubling question echoed across legal circles. What is being hidden behind those walls? This is dangerous, it's lawless, and it's unacceptable. Those were the words of Dan Goldman as he stood outside Metropolitan Detention Center, Brooklyn, publicly condemning the conditions inside the federally funded facility. His remarks followed reports that roughly 100 newly transferred ICE detainees had been placed there, despite the jail's documented failures. When elected officials are denied access to inspect a taxpayer-funded institution, serious questions arise about transparency, accountability, and oversight. At this stage, the situation has moved far beyond crisis and into systemic collapse. Judges have openly refused to send defendants to the facility. Transparency has evaporated. Oversight attempts have been blocked. Legal analyst Brian Buckmeyer, who has visited MDC Brooklyn multiple times, summarized the allegations bluntly. No heat, no water, missed meals, repeated lockdowns, and an inability to provide even the most basic medical care. These are not isolated complaints. They form a consistent pattern. In response to inquiries from CBS News New York, the Federal Bureau of Prisons released a statement asserting that inmate safety and humane conditions remain a priority. Officials claimed urgent action teams were deployed, staffing levels increased, and maintenance issues addressed. According to the agency, conditions had improved. However, court rulings, legal filings, and first-hand accounts told a starkly different story. For approximately 15 months, Diddy remained inside this environment. Federal judges openly criticized the facility. Violence was routine. Sunlight and fresh air were scarce. Basic human dignity appeared absent. The contrast was severe. From a $48 million Miami residence to a concrete cell where isolation and danger defined daily life. As his trial neared its conclusion, one reality was unavoidable. Regardless of any verdict, time had already been served in one of the most notorious detention centers in the country. Then in October, events nearly turned fatal. While asleep in his cell at MDC Brooklyn, Diddy reportedly awoke to find another inmate standing over him, a makeshift weapon in hand. The distance between survival and death narrowed to seconds, underscoring just how precarious life inside the facility had become. A former warden familiar with the inner workings of Metropolitan Detention Center Brooklyn has stated that Sean Combs' life could still be in serious danger inside the facility. That former warden, Cameron Lindsay, publicly raised concerns about the risks faced by high-profile detainees held under current conditions. Her assessment reinforced growing fears that confinement there remains volatile, unpredictable, and unsafe. On October 22nd, longtime producer and close associate Charlie Finney broke his silence, sharing details with the Daily Mail that immediately sent shockwaves through the media. Finney, a friend of more than 3 decades, described events inside the facility with blunt clarity, emphasizing that the threat was real and imminent. According to his account, the situation was not exaggerated or speculative. The details were quickly corroborated. TMZ confirmed through independent sources that the incident was not a rumor, but a targeted intimidation attempt. Their reporting characterized it as a deliberate message delivered in the most terrifying way possible. Sources indicated the act was calculated rather than random. According to Finney, Combs was asleep in his cell when another inmate approached, allegedly holding a weapon to his throat. The moment placed him seconds away from severe injury or death. Whether correctional officers intervened in time or whether the situation de-escalated through other means remains unclear. What is known is that the resolution has never been fully explained. Finney stressed that if the intent had been to kill, the outcome would have been immediate. A weapon in such proximity leaves no margin for error. The fact that Combs survived suggests the act may have been a warning rather than an execution. As Finney described it, the message appeared unmistakable. Survival in that moment did not guarantee safety the next time. Raymond Castillo, identified as Sean Combs' former cellmate, later clarified key details surrounding the reported threat inside Metropolitan Detention Center, Brooklyn. According to Castillo, the widely circulated claim that Combs awoke with a knife pressed to his throat did not fully reflect what occurred. The confrontation allegedly began over a minor dispute involving a chair. After an initial exchange appeared to end peacefully, the other inmate returned carrying a makeshift shiv. Castillo stated he intervened immediately, physically stopping the attacker before the weapon could be used. Surveillance cameras reportedly captured the incident, and authorities later removed the aggressor from the unit. Castillo emphasized that Combs' reaction stood out. Rather than escalating the situation, Combs allegedly responded calmly and urged the individual to reflect and pray, a rare display of restraint in a volatile environment. Officials subsequently transferred Combs out of MDC Brooklyn, relocating him to FCI Fort Dix, marking the end of his confinement at the Brooklyn facility, but not the end of risk. On October 30th, 2025, after approximately 15 months at MDC Brooklyn, Combs arrived at Fort Dix, a low-security federal institution in New Jersey. Defense counsel had requested placement near New York with access to the Bureau of Prisons Residential Drug Abuse Program, known as RDAP, which can reduce sentences for qualifying participants. Although approved for treatment consideration, Combs was housed in a specialized unit rather than general population, maintaining added restrictions and security oversight. Former Fort Dix inmate Joe Judas later warned that violence at the facility can erupt over trivial disputes, stressing the importance of humility and discretion. Despite its lower security designation, Fort Dix has experienced serious altercations involving rival groups. In November 2025, footage surfaced showing Combs assigned to routine prison labor, including work in the media library and laundry services. Reports soon followed alleging rule violations involving homemade alcohol and unauthorized phone calls, claims disputed by his publicist. Regardless of conflicting accounts, the transition underscored a consistent reality. Transfers change locations, not the inherent dangers of incarceration, and visibility can intensify risk rather than reduce it. The trajectory from arrest to transfer reveals a system defined less by rehabilitation than by endurance. From the earliest days in pretrial detention to placement in treatment units, each phase exposed structural failures that place detainees at risk regardless of profile or resources. Threats, intimidation, and rule enforcement inconsistencies illustrate how control inside federal facilities often depends on informal power rather than institutional safeguards. Transfers promise relief but rarely deliver certainty. New housing brings new routines, new hierarchies, and new flashpoints for conflict. Treatment programs offer structure and incentives, yet proximity, visibility, and reputation continue to shape risk. Even in lower security environments, trivial disputes can escalate, and rule violations, real or alleged, carry immediate consequences that compound pressure. Public narratives tend to simplify incarceration into a single moment or headline. The reality unfolds over months and years, marked by isolation, restricted access, and constant uncertainty. Safety hinges on staffing, oversight, and transparency, areas repeatedly criticized by courts and advocates alike. When those elements falter, intimidation becomes normalized, and accountability blurs. As proceedings move forward and placements evolve, one conclusion remains difficult to dispute. Confinement itself becomes punishment long before any verdict is rendered. Facilities tasked with custody must balance security with humane treatment, yet repeated lapses show how easily that balance collapses. The lasting impact is not confined to one individual. It reflects a system struggling to protect lives while enforcing the law.